It feels rooted in reality, but it's almost like a hidden layer of truth about the world, I would say. I wanted Ash City to be a shifting mirror, a reflection of perception, memory, and time. The city could be like a future version of Beijing, or it could be an alternate reality. It's never explicitly pinned down, and that ambiguity invites the reader to question their own sense of place and time.
You're listening to The Fearless Reader, a podcast where writers share their prose or poetry and then discuss it. I'm your host, David Eveland. Welcome, gentle listener. Our first few episodes have been poetry, which I enjoy, but I'm eager to get into some fiction as well. But I guess we're going to ease our way from the world of poetry into the world of fiction, because this episode's featured writer is principally known as a poet in Portugal, and this is her first foray into writing a novel. My guest will be Sara Costa. She has published some 5 poetry collections and also won some awards. In 2018, she won an International Literary Award called Gloria de Sant Ana. This is given to the best poetry book published in a Portuguese-speaking country for that year. Her work has been published in nearly a dozen languages, one of them thankfully English, and she is herself a translator. In 2020, she selected and translated a collection of contemporary Chinese poems, and I'm going to butcher the title, but it is called Poética Não Oficial Poesia Chinesa Contemporânea. And having said that, it is painfully obvious to me that I do not speak Portuguese, so I think I will hold off on listing any other accolades or publications, lofty as they may be, and instead get into the meat of today's episode, which is Ash City, her first novel, and it has been recently translated into English. You could find Ash City as a Kindle on Amazon or wherever. I'm not trying to promote any particular company or service except Ash City by Sara Costa. This episode also comes ahead of the Asia Pacific Writers and Translators Conference, which will be held in Chiang Mai, Thailand, later this week, actually, where I will be helping Sara to launch the English language version of this book. The excerpt you're about to hear is from the opening of the book, and it takes place in a massive apartment building complex within a megacity that is perhaps inside an alternative reality. It's also something like an untranslation, because it will have Sara reading in Portuguese and myself reading in English. If the result ends up being a little disorienting, that's probably okay for this particular book.
O condomínio era uma espécie de criança impossível, atravessada entre os dentes. Nenhum rosto humano ao abrigo da dialética.
The apartment building was a kind of unlikely child caught between the teeth. The dialectic protects no human face. One could look at the successive 50-story buildings knowing they would look back at us. The difference between the two observers simultaneously observed was that which exists between the creator and the thing being created.
Nada que a justifique, nada que seja delas direta consequência. Quando os pais de Maddie se mudaram para o condomínio, os vizinhos já sabiam disso. Comentavam com frequência o estado de saúde mental daquele cão que era visto a exasperar-se com o próprio reflexo nas águas do canal. Diziam...
When Maddie's parents moved into the apartment, the neighbors knew about it. They often commented on the mental health of the dog that seemed exasperated by its reflection in the canal water, saying, "This dog has no issues whatsoever, but it wants to die. This dog is depressed," would say Mr. Yu, an upstairs neighbor. "It's running along the canal as if it wants to retreat. I mean, it's trying to drown itself. It throws itself in and wants to stay there. Big and heavy as it is, it flamboyantly manages to fall and does not even fight against it.
Ela nunca tinha visto o cão fora dos limites do condomínio Shanjia.
I have rescued it 4 times and it always comes out smelling like a latrine of rotting meat.
Visto cão grande e pesado que se deixava afogar assim, intencionalmente.
I must put my clothes in the washing machine as soon as I get home and under the shower to avoid this odor ingrained in me."
Ao uso de óculos. Maddie não precisava de óculos, mas usava óculos e muitas vezes punha também tampões nos ouvidos. Era desagradável quando a areia aérea lhe entrava nos orifícios. Sentia o amarelo dos grãos a escurecer dentro da caixa.
Maddie found that whole conversation quite unusual. She had never seen the dog outside the boundaries of the Shanjia apartment building. It was a small dog, so she could not understand why Mr. Yu insisted that he had seen a large, heavy dog that was deliberately left to drown like that. The yellowish sky and the sandy air that floated between the gaps of sparse gray light invited you to wear some glasses. Maddie did not need them, but she wore glasses and often put earplugs in her ears. It was uncomfortable when airborne sand got into her holes. She could feel the yellow color of the grains darkening in her eardrums, distorting the sounds from her cornea to her optic nerve. That day, she left the house around 5 in the afternoon. By bike, it would take about an hour to get to the other side of the canal. She pulled out her cell phone to unlock one of the shared bikes in her apartment.
O fumo típico, fumo inconfundível.
The brakes were rusty and the pedals made a suspicious sound.
A qualquer momento.
The bike sometimes stopped completely as she pedaled, thrusting the most mechanical rattle. It had its intimacy with the wind. Whenever it stopped blowing, the bike stopped moving. The winding road between the floods of buses, bicycles, motorcycles, motorbikes, scooters, rickshaws, horses, brakeless pedestrians, and the yellow dust barely entering people's vision field went
A
dark.
única coisa passível de divisar eram os grandes edifícios de neon lá ao fundo, constantemente.
The typical smoke is the distinctive smoke coming from the end of books, the end of space, and the end of the world. At any moment, one could die, but that would only be one moment. Amid all others, one would live. There was a profound sense of life in these streets, where the risk of death
Tinha uma
tasted
intimidade
fresh,
muito própria com o vento.
the tainted freshness of a dreadful city. Around her, she could not make out any vehicle among that torrent of transportation. She could only make out the large neon buildings in the distance, constantly and desperately demanding attention.
E a poeira amarela, que mal entrava no campo de visão das pessoas, escurecia. O fumo típico, fumo inconfundível, fumo de fim de livros, fim do espaço, fim do mundo. A qualquer momento poder-se-ia morrer, mas esse seria apenas momento, entre todos os outros em que se viveria.
So the first thing I wanted to ask you about Ash City has to do with world building, because it's such a strange and intriguing setting. So Ash City is a sort of a Beijing, but it's like an Alice in Wonderland kind of Beijing. And the verisimilitude with the real world, it feels like it's always shifting. So it's not like a purely science fiction world where it's totally imaginary. It's also not quite Beijing. It might be the future. It might not be the future. I mentally divided it into sort of 3, I don't know, sections or something, just to help me, mentally like survive in this world or whatever as a reader. Okay. So you can tell me if this is accurate or not. So some things seem like just pure hallucination or imagination. There's a museum with this carrot field in it. There seems to be dimensional and time travel. There are people that maybe shapeshift, but then
Hmm.
also there are some things that are based on reality, but probably seem like they might not be to most readers. For example, the Temple Bar, which
Hmm.
for a certain subset of people, that's a very notorious bar that used to exist
Yeah,
in
yeah.
Beijing, but it seems made
Yeah, I'm
up.
so sad it's closed now,
Yeah,
but it's still made up.
yeah, I know, and now it seems even more like an invention now that it's like
That it's
a
over.
ghost in
Like,
the city's past. Yeah,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
and then there are also those. There are things that are quite recognizable that you could find on
Hmm.
Wikipedia or look up. The Phuket, Liaoning, there are Hutongs, there's Chinese
Hmm.
language, and other sort
Hmm.
of reference points to the actual world.
Yeah.
So, how do you think of my tripartite division, or how did you imagine, or how did you approach world building?
Yeah. World building was a fascinating process, actually. I would say that maybe you could recognize something from, Latin American literature a little bit, like Gabriel Garcia Marquez or all the kinds of this magic realism.
For a second, I was thinking like, oh, this is like magic realism, but without the realism.
But there is a little bit of realism. Well,
There
at least
is,
I
there is,
I
yeah.
I intended it to have. Okay, so yeah, so world building was a fascinating process because I wanted the city to exist, but in a space where reality and imagination could blur. I think that's quite obvious. And Ash City isn't purely fictional because it's not a typical science fiction setting. Let's put it like this. And because not everything is created from scratch, but also it's not entirely real either. So it's like when you dream about a place you know, but the details don't quite align, and the rules are kind of off, right? For me, Beijing was the perfect inspiration for this because of my experience living there, and also because I usually refer to this book as a kind of interior journey that I had in Beijing. So it's me seeing Beijing, but from the inside of myself, and all the creative aspects that it can build and transport with the my imagination, my fantasies, my perception on many times, and many times I'm not completely sober, stuff like that. So it's this interior scenery, let's say. Beijing was perfect for that because it's dynamic. It's a layered city. You have ancient hutongs that coexist with the ultra modern skyscrapers, and that duality actually allowed me to play with the idea of the verisimilitude, right? How close or far the city feels from reality. It really depends on the scene or the character's state of mind, and that's why this perspective of realism that you said that probably isn't there, or it's difficult to see. um, it is actually there, but just changes because it's very based on states of mind, and I always say this, that is, the main character is not Maddie or other characters. The main character is the city itself. So this, when I start by saying uh, the city happens to people, uh, no matter what, when you're there, it's the city that is happening to you, not happening in that city. And that's kind of the idea. If you take, for example, the museum and the carrot field, these are spaces that stretch the reader's imagination, but they're grounded enough to feel possible. I mean, you still have a very how to say, pictographic perspective, or it's like a surreal painting, right? You are in the middle of a museum and suddenly there's a door and the doors that give to other places in the museum, and suddenly there's this field of carrots. It's kind of, Marguerite looking at the window and the sea is by the side, like that woman that is looking at the river, but the sea is at the window. Um, and yeah, that's kind of the idea, to be a bit surrealist in my images. This imaginary comes a lot from my poetry. My poetry is a lot like that. It's all about successive images. Almost, even I used to compare my poetry much more to painting than to fiction because of this. Because I like to create successive surreal images. I would say something like the skin of the sea, and you immediately create an image in your head that is very surreal. Uh, and might be based on something that you actually experienced, because you experienced seeing, touching skin, and you also experience seeing and touching the water of the sea. So there's this kind of layer.
Actually, the next thing I was going to ask you about was about because I think of you as a poet, and
Mhm.
I wonder why you chose to write a novel, because you're known as a poet.
Yeah, I spent most of my writing career writing poetry, and I love it. Poetry has this ability to distill emotions and ideas into these sharp, concentrated moments. But I think there's also something liberating about the space a novel provides, and also about the reception, because it is difficult to read poetry when, well, you need to be a poetry reader. Also, I think this book, it's also a book for people who likes to read, because I think there are a lot of books, at least here in Portugal, because it was first published here in Portuguese. And I have this reaction from people that are like, why not a streamlined story? And some people just tell me, like my family just tells me straightforward, I couldn't finish your book. I can't understand anything. Uh, I understand nothing, and I couldn't finish the book. And this is because, people who don't like to read, maybe they don't like to read this book. People who are very used to reading, usually they kind of get it, and they find it, at least enjoying a little bit of joy in reading it, because they find it funny and interesting to see what's coming next and how unpredictable things are. So I always say, at least here in Portugal, and when I'm speaking to a broader audience, this is not a book for people who doesn't like to read, because it's not going to be very easy to digest.
I was going to say your voice as a poet does come through for sure.
Mm,
Um, and
yeah.
there are also some. You have a few poems included in the book.
Yes, yes, yes.
So I wondered. There's one about. Well, I don't want to say about, but there are
Uh-huh.
mirrors and there are apples, and it's pregnancy
Uh-huh.
related. Was that something that you wrote um, as a separately as a poem, maybe before the book? Did you write that poem for the novel,
I
or
actually
find it
wrote.
somewhere?
I wrote for the novel. Um, because yeah, I believe that this world Ash City is very poetic, so of course it made sense to have poetry. Also, it has a lot to do with my experience in Beijing. I wrote a lot of poetry when I was there, thanks to and this organization, I don't know, Speed Tune organization. And
I
no,
think I've
but
heard it.
because of that, you heard of it, yeah.
I have, yeah.
No, of course, when we were on SpeakTune, I was very motivated, in one hand, because I had this ability to share what I was doing, which is something that I often don't get here. Also because I am not so free here, Beijing has a setting, even a professional setting, that allows us to have more time, and that was very, very important for me to write a lot, to be a real writer. It's difficult to say when I'm here and I have to work so many hours, and now I am a mom and everything. Like, still saying, "Oh, I'm a writer," is very difficult because I don't feel like that. In the sense that in Beijing, I wrote every day. So that's why poetry also comes into it, because that's in a sense, this is a fiction book, but it is based a lot of, in my experience. I believe that I believe, no, I mean, I'm not a very proficient or novel writer, so I can't speak about how to write novels, but I can speak about how I did it. And for me, it was really consuming, having the experience inside of me, and then I didn't do much research, or I just had all of this in my head and in my feelings, in my memory. It was pretty fresh because I wrote it during the pandemic, so everything that happened the previous 3 years, since I was in Beijing from 2017, yeah, everything just came together in a kind of memory, and there are situations that try to be very allegoric of certain things that I actually lived, but that I don't think nobody will get there unless they know me very well. So the idea is not to be biographical, is to be something else, is to be creative, is to be art. But of course, that when I this process of writing has a lot to do with what I did. And just to answer about the poetry, um, poetry is so concise, and every word that's to earn its place in a novel. There's more room for exploration, but at the
Mm.
same time, I think that uh, I make sure that you're not losing that precision and impact along the way. But of course, it's a very balancing act. And for the pregnancy poem, yes, that's one of mine. I actually wrote it was writing the novel.
1. From the basket with fruit, we made a vitamin nest. 2. We all slept with each other, males with females, so urban that we never got our driver's license. 3. We didn't expect live to give life. The mirror seemed the only reproduction possible. 4. When I bite an apple, it still emits sound from the womb.
The image of the mirror and the apple resonates with the novel's theme, this idea of transformation, reflection, and the weight of generational stories. It was almost as if the poem was waiting for a larger narrative to unfold around it. So, yeah, it's a concise way of saying a lot of the things that I explore in a deeper and deeper length in the novel.
That's interesting. And I also wanted to. There's another poem in the book.
Mm-hmm.
This one is by Fernando Pessoa. So could you also talk about how you selected this poem and how it bears on the
Mm-hmm.
novel?
Yeah. Like it's actually from this Alexander Search. So Alexander Search is Fernando Pessoa when he was young. He was living in South Africa.
Is
He
it one
he
of
was
his like pseudonyms, or he had several? Right,
heteronyms, we call it, right?
heteronyms. That's the word I'm looking
Yeah,
for.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. He has many. He has many. He in Portugal, you study like three of them, like just to have a little bit of culture about Fernando Pessoa, like in school and everything. But when you go deeper, you see that he has like more than 50 heteronyms, and all of them. Fernando Pessoa was very specific about them. Like they all have their own background story, their biography. So he took that very seriously. That's why when we use Fernando Pessoa and we want to refer to his heteronym, we use the heteronym because we think that he really wanted us to do that. But Alexander Search is also like a period in time in which he was just discovering himself. I found it very, very relatable with this book, of course, and also it's a name of one of the characters. Then you find out, right? Uh, maybe the last one to appear. But yeah, Pessoa is one of those writers who feels timeless to me. His work has this duality because it's deeply philosophical, but there's also an emotional undercurrent that feels very raw and very human. And in Ash City, I wanted to explore themes of identity and reality, and Pessoa's work aligns beautiful with these ideas. His poem become a kind of touchstone in the narrative, reflecting the struggle of being both grounded and moored. It's that tension that you have between the dream world and the real world, and this is very central, of course, to Ash City because he says like he's having a conversation, right? In this poem, he is having a conversation. I love. Someone says, "I love what is real." And he says, I love the dream because how can something be real if it's not dreamed of?
Epigram. I love my dreams. I love my dreams, I said, a winter morn, to the practical man, and he, in scorn, replied, I am no slave of the ideal, but, as all men of sense, I love the real. Poor fool, mistaking all that is and seems, I love the real when I love my dreams. By Alexander Search, a.k.a. Fernando Pessoa.
So this was the part that I took from that poem.
So the book describes two pregnancies. There is Julia's pregnancy with Maddie, and then Maddie's pregnancy with her own child, Alexander. And then the mother and daughter, Julia and Maddie, are separated throughout the novel. They are not together a lot. There's at least one scene, maybe it's the only one, where Julia's trimming roses and she ignores the crying of her daughter. This is noticed by Mr. Yu and kind of pointed out. And then throughout the book, Maddie is searching fruitlessly for her mother who either abandoned her or had to leave her or whatever. So could you comment on this mother-daughter relationship in the book?
Sure, but I don't know if you noticed that there's a sequence when she goes to another place, when she's searching for her mother, and she kind of sees her again doing the same thing. There's a reminiscence of that in that world that she goes, and that is very oppressive, and there's a lot of violence going on there.
This is
Um,
the Stock City.
yeah,
I guess it's
and
because sometimes it's hard to tell what's real and
yeah,
what's
yeah,
not,
yeah,
and
yeah,
what's a
yeah, yeah,
hallucination.
yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah, of course, of course. And but there's a moment in which she appears again, the mother, Julia, to Maddie, but she's doing the same. So, is as it is in her memory, it's in Maddie's memory that her mother was just doing that for eternity, kind of the idea. But let me explain that. So, the relationship between Julia and Maddie is one of the emotional cores of the novel, and it's intentionally complicated. They're physically separated, but even when they're together, there's this emotional distance between them. At the beginning, I kind of give the idea that Julia is still next to the daughter when she's like left on the grass crying, and Mr. Yu takes care of her. During that moment in which she's a baby, the mother was present. Not that I describe that in detail, but there's this idea that she was present but still not present because, psychologically she wasn't. And then take the scene where Julia is trimming roses and Maddie's crying. It's one of the few times they're in the same space, but Julia is so absorbed in this practical task that she doesn't even notice the daughter's in pain, and Mr. Yu does. That dynamic speaks to a generational gap, and how Julia's way of dealing with things is rooted in action and survival, whereas Maddie is searching for connection and understanding. I think this can be explained like this. And throughout the book, Maddie's search for her mother mirrors her search for meaning itself, in this disorienting world. It's not just about finding Julia physically, it's about grappling with the legacy of their relationship and what it means to belong to someone. I think a lot of readers will resonate with that feeling of trying to understand your parents and yourself at the same time, because especially after giving birth, I think that it becomes more and more present in our existential crisis, I would say.
Could you talk about some of your literary influences on the novel?
Yes, of course. One of the biggest influences would be Zhang Xue, especially with her book Frontiers. And this is kind of Smoke City. That was the city that she was referring to in the novel Frontiers. Smoke City was Beijing, and my city is Ash City, so it is a direct reference to her. Just not so that it would be like exactly as she wrote it. So I didn't want to give it exactly the same title, but uh, the way she was writing. So she's a writer that really goes over the edge with this world creating in layers, perception, hallucination, dreams. Uh, it's absolutely what I try to do as well. Not as, not in the same way, because I have a different story to tell, of course. But yes, she was a big influence for me. I read that book and I was really amazed by it, and I became obsessed with the author. Also, this reflects, like, for me, this reflects a lot of what modern art in China is. Something that is very different from the references we have in the Western world, even though people call her contemporary Kafka, which is okay in some sense, because I think there's this surreal aspect in her books that becomes very like, it's like it's like in these Latin American situations in which something is funny until it is not. So you have in Kafka, for instance, not it's another geography, but I'm just mixing it up. It's another geography, but someone becoming an insect is a funny thing, right? Oh, I wake up and I was an insect. But then all the serious consequences after that, it's not funny at all. It's very like, it becomes very agonizing when you think about it in a serious situation. So is this duality of humor and agonizing existential crisis, you know?
Good combo.
Yeah.
I wonder, this may not have any connection, but Rickshaw Boy by Lao She, because it's a novel of Beijing, where Beijing seems almost a city that's like a character, and it's this person coming to this city where it's strange and new and weird. I thought about that a bit at
Yeah,
the beginning of your novel, which has rickshaws and also has
it does.
the dust, the sand from the Gobi Desert that gets in your nostrils and stuff. So I was,
Yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, it's also very well noticed. Is definitely a reference, not explicit, doesn't stay through all the book, but I like to just sprinkle references here and there. And yeah, good eye from your side.
all right. I think that's all the questions I have for now. So thank you, Sara Costa.
Thank you so much for inviting me, and I look forward to see you in Thailand.
Excellent. Ash City is published by Editora Labyrinto and translated from the original Portuguese by Emmanuel Reed. The Asia Pacific Writers and Translators Conference I mentioned, if you want to find out more about it, go to apwt.org or look them up on Facebook. The Fearless Reader podcast is a creation of the Spittoon Arts Collective, 100% labor of love. Our music is courtesy of Macondo.